The overarching theme is that we are body, mind, and spirit. And the more we disconnect those, the more we are going to struggle in our human experience. But the goal is to understand them and bring them back together.
Hello and welcome to Season 2 of Unlock Potential. I'm Brian Delaney. Our focus this season is fitness. I'll be joined by Dr. Duvall, who's going to guide us through his protocol for getting into your best shape so we can live our best lives and serve others well.
Hi, and welcome back to Season 2 of Unlock Potential. I'm Dr. Duvall, and this is episode 30, where today we're going to talk about the overarching history of physical exercise and healthcare for the modern human. So far this season, we've gone over the overview of the Stay Active method and gone into detail in a lot of the protocols. The purpose of the Stay Active method is to be as physically fit as we can be so that we are maximally helpful to others. We help people navigate the symptoms and signs in their body that guide them along their fitness journey, whether that's coming back from chronic injury, chronic illness, or just looking to maximize what their body is capable of. But it's really important to realize how we got to this point in our history so that we can see the potential as we move forward. This timeline up here is an attempt to represent where human beings first developed their physiology on an evolutionary basis, how our mind has developed along that journey, and where we've gone off course as humans, sometimes separating our knowledge from the requirements of our physical body, and how we are now attempting to bring those two things back together. Early humans first existed some 200 to 300,000 years ago. At this point, we were mostly hunting our food, going out in search of it, and gathering our food, getting it and bringing it back to a camp. But as we would clear out an area, either of the animals that we were hunting or the things that we were able to gather, we would then have to get up and move across the plains, move to new areas of the earth in order to access our food. This was very incumbent on our physical body to accomplish things that kept us alive. Over that time period, we eventually learned how to manage land in one particular area and grow crops over and over in that area, as opposed to having to go out after it. And we transitioned more to farming humans in that time period. But still, it was incumbent on the physical body to farm the land, to keep an eye on the herds and flocks of animals that we kept around, and to build our actual physical shelter. Now, that physical body is one portion of our human experience, the other two portions being the mind and our spirit. Now, the body is capable of, and in hunter-gatherers and farming humans, required to go through these specific characteristics. There needs to be lots of low-intensity activity. There needs to be short bursts of high-intensity activity. We need to be capable of moving through a broad range of motion, and we use the body as a single unit. We don't look at individual body parts. And so as hunter-gatherers and as farming humans, our body evolved to move in this way. Lots of low intensity, short bursts of high intensity, big range of motion, and all as a unit. We continued that through farming, but over time we started to develop the mind more. This is what allowed us to elevate even farther beyond the rest of the animals in the kingdom. Now the mind is ideas, where the body is activities. Basic ideas that were incumbent even in these early humans and these farming humans were things like good and evil, right and wrong, yin and yang, masculine and feminine, structure and feeling. So over time, these simple features were part of the early human experience, And over time, we developed also the awareness of spirit. And when we boil down spirit from all the major religions of the world, all the major spiritual communities of the world, they simply talk about and communicate with us as being connected. So we have activities, we have ideas, and those activities and ideas connect us together, both with other humans as well as other animals and the planet as a whole. Things like the golden rule, treating others the way we want to be treated, or not doing to others the way we don't want them to do to us. It helps us understand our ability to impact and influence the world around us. And so these simple features were part of the body, mind, and spirit of early humans and of farming humans. Now, over time, the mind continued to develop in the human. And as the mind developed in the human, there was early history. So we actually started writing things down and tracking. And this was about the time period that the major Greek and Roman philosophies came about. A lot of the major religions in the world, like Christianity and Hinduism and things like yoga, were originated around this time. So somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,000 years ago. And so this starts to branch and move from the body to the mind. The mind starts expanding more in the human. The spirit starts expanding more in the human experience, and the body is a significant portion of that process. But from a few thousand years ago up to the scientific revolution, that's when the mind really started to take off. Now, as the mind started to take off, we started to separate the mind and the body. We didn't look at all of these things as an interconnected piece. That's when we started to separate them out. And from the scientific revolution came the industrial revolution, which not only separated the mind from the body, but it reduced the requirements of the body. And as we reduced the requirements of the body, new things started to be required for the human experience. Modern healthcare is stepping in to try to fill that gap, that disconnect between the mind and body. And through that, we got exercise science. From there, we got modern fitness, so things that were the last 50 to 100 years. Some 20 to 25 years ago, CrossFit became involved. They revolutionized what was going on for modern fitness. And then the Stay Active method works to bring all of these mind, body, spirit pieces back together in order to move us into the future. So I glossed over a lot of the end there because I want you to see that the overarching theme is that we are body, mind, and spirit. And the more we disconnect those, the more we are going to struggle in our human experience. But the goal is to understand them and bring them back together. So we're going to go into a little bit more detail of some of that more recent timeline. Now, these are topics that I've thought intensely about, but haven't spoken about in a whole. So I've got my notes here. I appreciate your patience while I work through and explain each of these pieces as we go.
If you're tired of feeling low on energy and settling for the scraps, it's time for your personal revolution. We are helping people go from the person that they have been to the person they were truly meant to be, and helping people get to the next level in their life, their business, and their relationships. Follow us.
Now, before we go forward, I want to make it abundantly clear that we stand on the shoulders of giants. Everything that each thought leader understands, everything that each of us understands, is dependent on all of those that came before us. And so I am not saying that any of these processes that I'm about to go into were wrong. I'm simply saying that weaving the stories of when we get a little off course and bring it back into a corrected state is my entire goal for this episode. to explain where we've come from, where some of these concepts have gotten out of place, and bring them all back together so that we can all form a tighter unit and a more successful future. The scientific revolution was really where we started to separate the spirit from the mind as humans. A lot of the major religions of the world in our early history were working to create connection between the body, mind, and spirit. And they had stories, and they had Bibles, and they had books and readings and understandings and gatherings that tried to explain the past and tried to explain a moral code for moving into the future. But as the scientific revolution came about, we started to realize that some of those stories were not entirely accurate. And when those stories were not entirely accurate, some of us started to disregard religion altogether, which led to disregarding spirituality altogether. There was a philosophy understood called existentialism, where a famous philosopher by the name of Friedrich Nietzsche claimed God is dead. And the idea was that because of what we understood about the Bible, they were not entirely true stories, and so therefore we disregarded it altogether. Now, unfortunately, that means we release a greater sense of purpose, because if we were tying our purpose in the world to our particular religious story or to our understanding of spirituality, and it was deemed untrue, we unfortunately get rid of it altogether. And that's incorrect. We need to loop those things back together to have a greater sense of who we are and why we're here. So we move from the scientific revolution and we start to expand the mind more. And as we start to expand the mind more, we start to look at the body. And we start to assess the body, and we start to try to understand all of the inner workings of the body. And this can get into a problem when we start to think that the mind can fix the body, that the mind is absolutely the necessary thing to keep the body healthy, as opposed to a connection between the mind and body. And so there was early medicine and early healthcare known as vitalism. And from vitalism came a series of different modalities known as chiropractic, naturopathy, osteopathy, and others. And the idea behind vitalism was that the energy that created the body could heal the body. And so the idea was that we need to get rid of the concept that the mind was controlling and influencing the body altogether, but that the mind was a part of what the body needed to be healthy, and that there was a spirit associated with that whole process. And that can be successful, and at the same time, letting the body just do its thing at will is not necessarily what will always keep us healthy either. And so modern medicine started to understand what was creating death imminently, and we are going to help fix that. And so if you are about to perish, modern medicine is fantastic with drugs and surgery to keep us alive. But sometimes in attempting to allow us to thrive, modern medicine can disempower us. It can take away our autonomy to use our body with the awareness that, oh, if I just think about what the body needs and then supplement it, then everything will be okay. What it fails to do is look at the activities that are necessary for the body. We go through the scientific revolution and the industrial revolution, and we gradually get rid of lots of low intensity activity. We gradually get rid of bursts of high intensity activity. We get rid of broad ranges of motion. And more recently, we get rid of thinking of the body as a single unit, and we start looking at it at its individual parts. And so what we try to do with the Stay Active method is bring back to lots of low intensity activity, bursts of high intensity, broad ranges of motion, and using the body as a single unit with a lot of the knowledge that we gained through the scientific revolution. Now, I went through chiropractic college, and as I was in chiropractic college, I had chosen to take the one with the most rational Western philosophy. Of all of the colleges that were available, the one that I went to was known to be the most scientifically based. Because one of the things that I had heard about chiropractic is that it's not founded in rational thought. And so I chose the one that was going to be most rational. And while I was in the middle of college, I started to investigate some of the scientific articles that were written about chiropractic and why it was healthy and helpful. And in those, there was the concept that lots of our chronic illnesses, lots of our chronic injuries and diseases were the result of excessive stress, or as I term, short-term physiology, with little to minimal rest and recovery. So we've got stress and we've got rest. We've got short-term physiology, we've got long-term physiology. And most chronic diseases were the result of too much short-term physiology, not enough long-term physiology. And that made perfect sense to me. It had to do with blood sugar issues. It had to do with autoimmune issues and cancer issues. This imbalance, this hormonal imbalance, made perfect sense to me. And the concept that I was taught about chiropractic and how it helps is that when there is movement, that movement reduces the stress response. It helps create a balance of short-term and long-term physiology. The scientific articles showed this quite clearly. And what I was taught about chiropractic in school was that the manipulation of the spine, the movement of the spine, is the movement that is required to reduce that stress response. But as I investigated those articles a little more closely, what I found was it had nothing to do with the adjustment. These were articles about overall movement of the body, not specific minute movements of the body once a week or once a month or once every 6 months. It was about the overall movement of the human. And so when I was in chiropractic college, I also started to do CrossFit myself. I went to CrossFit.com and started to do that exercise program. And as I did that exercise program, I felt physically better on a regular basis. And as I felt physically better on a regular basis, I had fellow students say, "Hey, can you show me what you're doing?" And I would show them what I was doing off of CrossFit.com. And after a few weeks, they would come back to me and they'd say, "Hey, I've had this shoulder issue for quite a while. And I was getting treated for chiropractic and it was maybe getting better for a short term, but it was always coming back. But when you had me start exercising, that went away and I didn't feel the need to get treated anymore." I had somebody come up to me and say, "I've been seeing a chiropractor for 5 to 10 years now, and my arms go to sleep at night. And so I've been getting adjustments to try to help my arms from going to sleep at night. And when I exercise the way that you've shown me here, my arms don't go to sleep anymore." And after they told me that, they stopped showing up for their workouts. And then about 6 weeks later, they came back. And when they came back, they said, "I said that my arm numbness had improved, but when I stopped exercising, it came back again." And so this person got back into exercise. And as they got back into exercise, that numbness when they were going to sleep started to dissipate again. And so I'm in chiropractic college learning that short-term physiology and long-term physiology needs to be balanced, and that lots of physical exercise with the body is going to be very beneficial for that process. And so I started to realize we need to start to blend this and bring this back together. And so that's where I've gotten to with the Stay Active method. Now, as I was going through that, I also started looking into physical therapy. And a lot of chiropractors in the modern time, and what I was learning while I was going through school, was founded in ideas from modern physical therapists. And so I wanted to understand where rehab and physical rehabilitation came from and how we can use that to help people who are taking on CrossFit. Because inherent in any high reward exercise program comes risk. And so the whole goal with taking on the risk is that you get a good reward. How do we minimize the risk and maximize the reward? I assumed that if I understood more about physical rehabilitation, the lengthening and shortening and sliding of all of the tissues in our body, and the balancing of short-term and long-term stress, that we would be able to help people even more than they've been helped so far. And so I started studying, where did early physical therapy come from? And early physical therapy came from patients who had had polio. And those patients had been infected with polio and had survived, but they had had issues with the weakness and contraction of their musculature. And so their muscles were not capable of firing as well and would get stuck in one particular position. And so physical therapists started as a profession by working with these polio patients, and they would stretch the tissues that had gotten contracted. They would passively just get in there and start to work those tissues because the patient could not move that musculature themselves. And so the physical therapist would get in there and get that movement going. And as they got the movement going, those post-polio patients had some benefit and had some success. We'll get back to how we incorporate that in a little bit. So as we look at modern healthcare is attempting to take on a lot of the diseases that are associated with the human body. And we saw that with the scientific revolution, we start to separate the mind and body and the spirit. And with the industrial revolution, we start to reduce the activity of the body. Now, there was a subset of humans that with that reduced activity took it upon themselves to say, hey, my body is capable of more. I am capable of challenging myself, even though life doesn't require it of me. And these early weightlifters, these early individuals who started to challenge themselves, sometimes understood as the circus strongmen, basically went around and said to the world, this is what the human body is capable of if you do particular activities. And so while some of the physiology and some of the health and some of the physical capabilities of humans were dropping, these individuals came and said, no, this is what the human body is capable of.
Check out the official Unlock Potential store, where inspiration meets style. Explore our exclusive collection of gear inspired by the transformational messages straight from our Unlock Potential podcast. From trendy apparel that embraces the power of positivity to accessories that fuel your motivation, we've got something for every go-getter. Spread the messages of empowerment, energy, and motivation that you get from the Unlock Potential podcast by grabbing your gear today.
Now, that has broken out into what I would consider 5 basic categories. And so I want to talk you through those 5 basic categories and what some of the strengths and weaknesses are in each of those categories. First is Olympic weightlifting. Now, Olympic weightlifting is actually done in the modern Olympics as well as a competitive sport. There is what's known as a barbell. It's a single weight that you can grab with both hands. And as you grab it with both hands, the idea is to get it off the ground and move it all the way up overhead and be standing at the top when that weight is up overhead. And this got broken down into a few different types over the years and now has landed on two specific types, one called the snatch, one called the clean and jerk. And the snatch moves the weight from the ground all the way up overhead in one single motion. And the clean and jerk moves it from the ground all the way overhead in two motions because it pauses at the shoulders, what's known as a clean, and then it goes all the way overhead. That's what's known as a jerk. Now, this can lead to fragility with fatigue. The reason that this can lead to fragility, as we've discussed in the pyramid of fitness, is that strength is the peak of the pyramid, and then you're required to have stamina and flexibility as the base of the pyramid. Now, the competitive aspect of the sport is that you do one repetition at a maximal weight. So that's a really tall peak. And they are looking at focusing all of their energy, all of their physiology into building that particular peak. And you'll sometimes see that that peak wobbles. Sometimes sudden injuries occur because they're so far up the peak that they don't have the right level of flexibility or the right level of stamina. And so if that is our singular focus, that can create a fragile body. At the same time, if we have that as some of our focus, we are realizing that, hey, the human body is capable of lifting a lot of weight off the ground. And of all of the athletes, this shows that there is a really specific level at which the strength to weight ratio is maximized. What that means is somebody who weighs a certain amount lifts a multiple of their weight off the ground all the way up overhead. And so as individuals get heavier, that goes up, but then they eventually get so heavy that the strength to weight ratio goes down. And so there is an ideal level of human that is capable of moving weights up off the ground efficiently. So Olympic weightlifting can lead to fragility if it's a singular focus. It lets us know that, hey, there's an ideal weight for human beings to exist in order to be strong. Branching from there is what's known as powerlifting. Now, powerlifting is, again, utilizing a barbell, but as it's utilizing that barbell, there's three different ranges of motion. So Olympic weightlifting is always from the ground all the way up overhead, and powerlifting does three different activities. One of those activities is that it holds the weight at the shoulders, and you, from standing, sink the hips down and stand back up. That's known as a squat. There is what's known as a bench press, where the individual lays backwards on a bench, holds that barbell with straight arms, lowers it to their chest and presses it straight back up. And third is known as the deadlift, where the weight is on the ground. The individual grabs it and stands up with it. So Olympic weightlifting, the range of motion is the same with two different styles. Powerlifting, there are three different ranges of motion. Now, a really big benefit that came out of this is one particular gym in Ohio that has expressed some of the most successful powerlifters. And what they utilized was that you can maintain safety and create more stability by utilizing a few different aspects in your training. So powerlifting is again focused on a single repetition, just like Olympic weightlifting. But this particular gym showed us that There's small amounts of super high intensity helps the individual to stay strong. So heavy weights, just a few reps. They also showed that a high speed at lighter weights helps contribute to the strength. And so you don't always have to push your heaviest weights to be strong. Sometimes you can support that with lighter weights while intending to go faster. And then utilizing higher volume of relatively lighter weights, creating pump in the musculature, can help with blood flow. So whereas a singular focus of a single repetition doesn't create a lot of blood flow, you can support your training with more repetitions and more blood flow. Now, powerlifting, just like Olympic weightlifting, if you're focused too much on that single repetition, can create fragility. And because most of your training is focused on less repetitions, you can create high levels of fatigue and energy inefficiency. But we learned through Olympic weightlifting and through powerlifting that you can support that with the right type of training. Another branch from there, so the circus strongmen branched off. Some of them lifted heavier weights and showed the capability of how much weight a human could move. And others started to focus on what the body looked like, what kind of change you could create by challenging the body in a particular way. This branch became this branch became bodybuilding. Now, bodybuilding, the focus was an emphasis on the size of the musculature and the symmetry of the musculature when looked at by somebody else. Now, they taught us that the human body is capable of increasing its size by training in a particular way. And so if we are low on muscle, we can utilize bodybuilding style activity in order to add muscle to the system. And we've realized through Olympic weightlifting and powerlifting that there is an ideal weight that somebody should be in a body weight to maximize their strength. And so if we are underweight or under-muscled, we can work to increase that by focusing on bodybuilding style activity. However, this can also create suffering because too much of that actually focuses on inefficiency within the muscle, which means we burn a lot more energy for the same amount of work. And so when we push ourselves from low to an appropriate amount of muscle, we feel more energized and more capable. We feel more helpful to others because we went from a little more weak and a little more frail to a little more powerful and invigorated. But if we go farther than that, the requirements on the body and the inefficient style of training that's required for that to occur leads us to less energy efficiency, feeling more sluggish and more tired, feeling more depleted over time and struggling to be productive outside of anything focused on the gym. And so bodybuilding can help us to a certain degree, but if we focus on it too much, makes us sluggish and tired. Now moving from there, we've got Olympic weightlifting and we've got powerlifting that are focusing on single repetitions. We've got bodybuilding that is focusing on multiple repetitions, but with inefficiency in the short term in order to add muscle mass. Now there's a fourth category known as world's strongest man or strongman exercise. And instead of using just a barbell, just a singular weight that is used with both hands, like you do in powerlifting and Olympic weightlifting, strongman uses lots of varying objects. And by varying up the objects that they use, you end up building a more resilient body. So if you lift something off the ground that's close to you and far away from you, you're more capable of helping somebody move an odd object like a couch or a bookshelf. If you're utilizing both singular repetition as well as multiple repetitions up to 30 or 60 seconds, you're not as likely to fatigue yourself and be capable of helping others. And so strongman shows us that you can utilize your strength for multiple repetitions. It doesn't just have to be a singular repetition. Now, what they also show us is that heavier and heavier bodies are capable of moving heavier and heavier weights, which can be helpful. But again, like we've talked about before, if we get too heavy, that leads to fatigue in the rest of our life. And so if we get too far out that spectrum, then we start to be less helpful to others. And so we want to start to alter that back down to a different, more optimal body weight. And this is where another type of exercise comes in, known as endurance. So endurance sports started to come up around that time as well. The idea that you're moving your body for longer and longer distances. Originally done as running, but you've added to that over the years things like cycling, rowing, swimming, and other activities like endurance mountain biking and endurance kayaking, in order to realize that, hey, lots of different activities can support moving the body over a longer period of time. Now, the right amount of focus on endurance sports and being capable of going for a longer period of time is that your energy is more efficient. When done correctly, you feel generally more energized throughout the day. You've got the capability of utilizing that energy to help other people often. Where it can go too far is that all of those repetitions and all of that blood flow and all of that efficiency can also lead to decreases in muscle mass, decreases in bone density, decreases in tissue healing over time. And so taken too far, it can lead to atrophy. It can lead to less capability. You're really good at doing one singular exercise for a long period of time, but if you have to help that friend move a couch or a bookshelf, you're not nearly as capable. And so there's a sweet spot to the amount of endurance sport that you might take on. There's a sweet spot to the amount of lighter, lower intensity, longer duration work. Now, those 5 categories, Olympic weightlifting, powerlifting, bodybuilding, strongman, and endurance sport, show us that different styles of activity are capable by the human being. If we bring that all the way back to our early humans, we see lots of low intensity activity. That helps you maximize your endurance sport. There's bursts of high intensity activity. That's shown in strongman and powerlifting and Olympic weightlifting. There's broad range of motion. It's shown in bodybuilding that the best way to add more musculature is to use as big a range of motion as possible in order to accommodate that. Now, the body as a single unit is something that is understood in Olympic weightlifting. It's understood in strongman and in endurance sport. It's gotten a little bit lost in bodybuilding. And sometimes as a result, I've heard that it's gotten lost in powerlifting as well. So as we move on, those were the modern circus strongmen that branched out into 5 different categories of what is possible in the human body. We're going to take a break here and continue the discussion in next week's episode. We're talking about the history of the needs of the human body, the history of physical exercise and healthcare, and the future, which is the Stay Active method, building your body to its physically fittest capable so you are maximally helpful to others. See you next week.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Unlock Potential. For exclusive content, make sure to subscribe to our Patreon. Follow us across all socials at @TheBrianDelaney and visit our website at thebriandelaney.com to shop our gear and see what's coming up next.
The information and views expressed by our host or guests on the Unlock Potential podcast are their own, and not a substitute for professional medical or fitness advice. Always consult with qualified healthcare or fitness professionals before starting any new exercise program or making changes to your current routine.